Rebirth For You is the latest in the proud line of Bushiroad waifu trading card games. It's also where they parked their Hololive and Toho Project licenses. So how does it play? As far as getting started, it's actually one of the easiest of any trading card game I've played. You take your 3 partnered cards, you take a cost 1 or 2 card, and place it face down in your entry zone. I'll get into zones later. And then you draw 3 cards from the top of your deck, and you decide who goes first. That's it. You don't need to worry about mulligans, because there are none. You draw 3 cards, and that's your starting hand. So once you've decided who goes first, all players reveal their first card, and you get to start. So turn order is fairly simple. You start by standing any of your rested cards. It's basically the untap step from any number of other games, and you draw 1 card from the deck. Then you move into an energy phase where you can set one of the cards from your hand face down as an energy, and also you can set one of your partners as an energy. Next we get into the main phase, and I'll just go briefly into the types of cards we have. There's normal characters with a blue border, there's spark characters with a yellow border, and then further on there are also green bordered cards. Those are characters that'll let you do an effect at some point during the opponent's turn, either canceling one of their effects, stopping an attack, and so on. Furthermore, there are horizontal oriented cards called rebirth cards, and we'll get into those a little bit more as we play. They are quite important to how this game plays out. So during the main phase, you can play cards from your hand to the field, and you can also pay the cost of a character in your entry to move it back. The way the field is set up in this game, you've got 1 entry and 3 member slots. Your member slots are what you use to declare your attacks, but the entry is the card actually applying its stats. So the cards in your member slots, their stats don't matter. They're literally only tapping to help out your main card attack. Anytime the entry slot is empty, you automatically flip a card from the top of your deck into that slot without paying any costs. So if I move Matsuri here back to a member zone, the entry is empty, and you flip the top card. We've just flipped over a spark card. Spark cards have an effect when they entry in this way. In this case, it just gets +2/+2 for the turn, which isn't super relevant since you can't attack on your first turn. So at this point, we've played 1 card from our hand, we've moved our card back. This is where we would move to combat, but since it's the first turn, there is no combat to be had, so we'll just pass the turn over to our opponent. Now the opponent, since they are going second, they actually get to start with 1 partner in play, and then they move through their turn in much the same way. They draw 1, they play a partner, they play a face down energy, they will pay 2, paying the cost to move this back to member. They now have to entry in, and they hit a rebirth card. Rebirth cards, whenever they are flipped off the top, you apply their effect, and then you keep flipping, and if you play them from your hand, you draw a card as soon as you play them. The effects from rebirth cards are often very powerful. They're almost on the tier of climaxes from Weiss Schwartz, if you're familiar with that game. But as you'll notice, we flipped a rebirth card. Its effect counts the number of cards in retire, which we don't have any yet, so it has no effect currently, but it sticks around until the end of your turn and provides a nice +1/+1 bonus to your entry character. But you'll notice that's now an empty slot, so we need to keep flipping. We flipped over Marine. She has a True Power level 3 ability, which lets her draw a card. Level 3 means that you need to have that many cards either in your retire or in your member combined. So you could have 2 cards in your retire or 1 member, or just 3 members and no retire. We don't have either of those, so her effect does not happen. So now we can move on to combat. And combat is very, very simple. As I mentioned, you tap the member to encourage the entry to attack. The entry applies its attack power to the opposing entry's defense power, and if you've done more damage over the course of a turn than the defending player has defense, that card goes to retire. However, in this case, we only have 2 plus the 1 from the Rebirth card, which is only 3 damage, which isn't enough to force a retire here. So in that case, our attack hasn't been particularly successful, so we'll just end the turn. The Rebirth card is discarded, goes to the waiting room, and it is now the next turn. So once again, we stand all of our rested cards, we draw 1 partner, 1 face down energy. Now, at this point, we have 2 options. We can either move our entry back to the member and hope to get another lucky flip, but once your member slots are full, you can no longer pull members back. You can play cards from your hand to the entry, which replaces your current entry. It just would send it to the waiting room, but you can't replace any of your members. Once they're there, they're more or less stuck unless they get removed by an effect. The other option is to just be happy with our 4/5 as our entry and play another member to get a full lineup and move to attacks, which is what we will do. Also worth noting, usually spark cards only have an effect when they're flipped from your deck into the entry. They don't tend to have any effect while they're in play. So in this case, this card doesn't have any effect, this card doesn't have any effect, this card doesn't have any effect, and this card has a true power level 5, which we're not there yet. So we'll move to our attacks. This attack puts 4 damage on Marine here. She's got 5 defense, so 1 more attack will be enough. That's now exceeded her defense, so she goes to retire over here, and since the entry is empty, another card is flipped. This is again a true power level 3 card, so its effect doesn't happen yet. Fortunately, however, for us, it's only got 4 defense, which means we can encourage our final attack, apply 4 damage. It goes to retire. Once again, we flip. Now we are at level 3, so the effect happens, and it discards 1 of the opponent's members. So they will target the only one with a relevant effect. It goes to the waiting room. Which obviously would have been much more useful if it had triggered while I still had any members standing ready to attack. The game is over once any player gets 7 or more cards in their retire and they have a card in their entry. Sometimes there are cards that recover life, so if you flip them into your, these are rebirth cards, if you flip them into your rebirth zone while you have 7 damage and you can recover back down to 6, you are able to keep playing. It's only once all 7 cards are in damage and there's a card in entry that the game is over. So again, we pass the turn over. Stand all rested cards, draw 1. We'll play the 3rd and final partner card, and we will play a card face down. So 3/4 isn't all that strong an attacker, so we're going to move her back to member. Flip another card. This is a 3/7, which is obviously much more powerful. Now we could deploy another card from our hand, which we will do. We will pay out 3. 3, there we go, to play out another Marine. Combat, 1 attack for 3 damage, a 2nd attack for 3 damage, which now puts that into our retire, and we flip our next entry. It's only a 2/4, but fortunately our opponent doesn't have enough power to get there. But our opponent's feeling a bit spicy. They're going to use Marine's ability. When she supports, you can put her on the bottom of the deck to give your entry +3 power, which brings her power to 6, which is now enough to force a retire here. We flip our next entry and start our turn. Draw 1, stand, and play our partner. For now, I like the cards in my hand, so I'm not going to bother playing any more energy. And I'm just going to deploy one more card here to fill in my member zone, and we'll move to combat. Hato here has a very powerful effect. When she attacks, she gets +1 power for the turn for each of the members, and then if she has 8 or more power, she goes into the waiting room after the attack is finished. So for the first attack here, we will use our member to support. She gets +3, which brings her up to 7 power, which forces a retire here. Next one's flipped. This one has 8, which is fine. We can support. That brings her power up to 10, which is enough to force a retire. They flip, and now since she has 8 or more power, she is discarded, and we move to the next card. This is a Rebirth card, so it just sticks around here. And it also has Recovery 1, which lets us heal 1 damage, put it in the waiting room. We keep flipping, and that's pretty lackluster. That's a 2-3, which is obviously not a good entry at all. Fortunately, now that we have 3 partners, we can do what's called a partner attack. So you use a member to support the attack, just like you normally would, but if you rest your 3 partner cards, it becomes a partner attack. Partner attacks can't be blocked by opposing effects, and it also automatically defeats the entry, forcing that into retire, and we flip yet again. Rushia lets us take a character from our waiting room and put it to member. We don't have any characters in our waiting room, so that's another wasted spark, unfortunately. So we proceed to the next turn. Stand all rested cards, draw, play an energy, pay 3 for another Marine. We will move on to an attack here. Oh, at the end of our turn, this would have been discarded. It's only at the end of your turn that the Rebirth card is discarded. So if you flip a Rebirth card on the opponent's turn, it actually sticks around and provides its bonus straight through to the end of your turn. But obviously that one flipped on our turn, so at the end of our turn it goes away. So for this attack here, 3 damage is enough to defeat Matsuri here. So we entry in. This has a true power level 3 that we can now activate since we have 3 cards in our member and also 2 cards in our retire, so we're actually at level 5. And this one just draws us 1 card for our hand. So for this next attack, we will use Marine. She once again uses her effect, puts herself on the bottom, and gives us +3 power, which is enough to force 1 more retire. We flip. Again, a 4-8, very important, but the opponent has their 3 partner cards, so they can do a partner attack, which again, we can't defend and automatically forces a retire. So we flip here, and this just gives our opponent -1 and ourselves +1 for the turn, but the turn is now over, so it resets to its stated stats. Stand. Draw 1. We don't have a whole lot to do right now, but what we can do, we'll play our 1 energy for the turn and move on to combat. We'll start out with a partner attack to clear out this 3/7 defender, which is quite strong. The opponent flips. That is a Rebirth card that recovers 1. Flip again. Fortunately, that's a fairly weak card that we can deal with a simple attack here. So we'll retire that. The opponent flips. And that is a 5/7, which we're not going to be able to get through even with our attack here. So we will just end the turn. The opponent stands. Draws 1. So Marine is quite a powerful character, but she her ability is a recombo, which means that you need to have a rebirth in order for it to be active, and unfortunately this one calls for a specific rebirth, Sunken City, which is this one, which we unfortunately don't have in play, so right now she doesn't have any effects. We also don't have that card in our hand, but a 5/7 attacker is still a good place to start, so we'll play out one more member from our hand here, and we'll move on to our combat step. So this rebirth gives our character +1 power for the first attack, so that brings it up to 6, which is enough to force a retire here. Now, we're going to get a little bit clever here. Because it only gets a +1 bonus for the first attack off of this rebirth card, we can discard a card with blocker from our hand to prevent that attack. And now they're stuck with only 5 power, which means they're going to need to use 2 attacks to get through it. So instead of doing 2 attacks, they're just going to do 1 partner attack and hope we hit something weak on our next flip. So that is retired. We got the exact same card, and if it wasn't already enough, this also reduces the power by 1 off of the spark effect. So it's only got 4 power against 6 defense, so there's not really any point in continuing the attack, so the opponent will end their turn. This rebirth card is discarded, and we may begin ours. We draw 1. And unfortunately, we're still somewhat stuck with a relatively low-powered attacker, but our opponent is at 6 retires, so we'll hope that this is enough to finish the game. So we will pay 3 to use Fubuki's effect to give our attacker +1 power for the turn, and we will move to our combat step. For the first attack, we're going to make it a partner attack and try and end the game right here. Now our opponent can't defend, and their character is automatically defeated. This is now 7 cards in the retire. They're not defeated yet. They have to flip to see if they get a recovery effect. That's not a recovery effect. So our opponent has lost this game, and that is Rebirth
for you.